The diner went dead silent when the door slammed open so hard the glass rattled in its frame. 7 men swaggered inside their presence, dark and heavy as a thunderstorm rolling over the lakefront. Forks froze in midair cups stopped halfway to mouths, and the soft hum of conversation evaporated into suffocating stillness. Fear wrapped around the room like smoke. In the far corner, a man sat alone in a booth, his sandwich untouched. His name was Daniel O'Connor. To anyone glancing his way, he looked like another traveler passing through Chicago, just a tall man in a navy t-shirt and jeans, a baseball cap pulled low over eyes that revealed little. But Daniel's gaze was locked on the newcomers with an unshakable steadiness, the kind of stare forged in fire discipline and years of standing unyielding in front of a sacred tomb. The thugs didn't notice him, not yet. Follow my story to the very end, and don't forget to comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far this story reaches. The leader stepped in last, and the air seemed to bend around him. Vincent Vinny Caruso, mid-40s, wore a sleek black suit that clung like a snake's skin. A thin scar carved down his cheek, a mark that lent his smirk a predator's edge. Behind him trailed 6 younger men, broad-shouldered and brimming with arrogance. Tattoos curled up their necks, cheap cologne mixed with the bitter stench of cigarettes, and every movement carried menace. Parents clutched children and scrambled for the door. An older couple shrank into their booth, whispering frantic prayers. The diner's atmosphere shifted from cozy warmth to a cage where prey awaited the predator's strike. At the counter, Anthony Russo, owner of the diner, straightened. He was in his early 60s, silver-haired, his left arm stiff from an old war injury. His Marine Corps tattoo peeked from beneath his sleeve, faded but proud. Yet his jaw clenched tight because he knew this wasn't the first time Vinny had darkened his doorway. Vinny's polished shoes clicked against the linoleum as he strolled forward, hands tucked lazily into his pockets, eyes scanning the diner like a wolf choosing which sheep to kill first. "Anthony, my friend?" He drawled, his tone honeyed but heavy with threat. "You know what day it is?" Anthony's lips thinned. "We paid you last month, Caruso. Business is slow. You're bleeding us dry." Vinny chuckled low and sharp. "Slow. Look around. The booths are full. Don't insult me. You and your wife think you can stiff me because you hide behind veterans' photos on the wall." He leaned close, voice dropping to a razor's whisper. "You know what happens when people stop paying." Behind the counter, Elena Russo appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. Her hair graying at the temples was tied neatly back. She had the firm but warm eyes of someone who had once been a combat nurse, eyes that had seen suffering and refused to bow. She stepped forward, voice steady, despite the tremor running beneath. "Vincent, please. We're honest people. We can't keep giving you money we don't have." The leader's smirk twisted cruelly. "Honest people." He spread his arms wide, gesturing at the photographs of soldiers that lined the walls. "You're just a pair of washed-up vets running a greasy spoon. Nothing but ghosts clinging to uniforms." A stocky thug with a shaved head slammed his palm onto the counter, rattling the cash register. "Enough talk. Open it up, lady." Anthony took a single step forward, his voice rising. "You don't scare us." "I fought in Fallujah. I've seen worse than you'll ever be." The thug laughed, pulling a bat from under his jacket. Big words for a man with one good arm. It was then the chair scraped against the floorboards. Slow, deliberate. Every head turned. Daniel O'Connor rose from his corner booth, his shadow stretching long across the linoleum floor. He wasn't hulking like the gangsters, but something in his posture, ramrod straight shoulders, squared calm carved into his features, made the air vibrate differently. His voice when he spoke was low but carried with authority, like the command of a man who had spent years in silence until words mattered more than bullets. "That's enough," Daniel said. "Back off." The thugs broke into laughter, but the sound was strained. Vinny pivoted, eyes narrowing as he studied the stranger. "And who are you supposed to be, some wannabe hero?" He sneered. "Sit down, pal, before you get yourself hurt." Daniel didn't flinch. He didn't blink. His eyes locked on Vinny's, steady as stone. "I said back off. You're done here." The silence that followed pressed against the walls. Even the ceiling fan seemed to pause. Somewhere behind the counter, Elena's grandson Nicky peeked out, his phone clutched tight, already recording. He whispered under his breath, "Holy hell." Vinny tilted his head, scar twitching as his smirk returned. You got a death wish, buddy. You even know who I am. Daniel reached slowly into his pocket. The thugs tensed, expecting a weapon. But what he drew was small silver and glinting beneath the diner's fluorescent lights. A badge not of the police, but of something older, pure. My name is Daniel O'Connor, he said, his voice a steady oath. Sentinel of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. I've sworn to protect what's right, and what you're doing here, it's as wrong as it gets. A ripple went through the room. Anthony's eyes widened, recognition dawning. Elena's hand flew to her apron, hope flickering. Patrons who had been frozen in fear straightened, breaths caught in their throats. Vinny's laughter rang out, but there was a thin edge of unease. A tomb guard. What so you march in circles for dead men? This ain't no parade, soldier boy. This is Chicago. Get 'em! Two thugs lunged forward, one swinging the bat, the other flashing a knife. And in that instant, the quiet sentinel in the corner transformed into something the gangsters had never faced before. The bat sliced through the air with a crack like thunder, but Daniel O'Connor was already moving. He sidestepped the swing with the precision of a man who had drilled every motion 1,000 times under the weight of duty. His hand shot out, clamping the thug's wrist, twisting it until the bat clattered uselessly to the floor. With a swift jab to the solar plexus, the man doubled over, gasping like a fish out of water before collapsing to his knees. The second attacker lunged with a knife, the blade flashing under the diner lights. Gasps erupted from the booths, Elena instinctively shielding her grandson behind her. Daniel's hand snapped up, catching the thug's arm mid-swing. In one fluid motion, he redirected the momentum, flipping the man over his shoulder and slamming him flat onto the tiles. The thud echoed across the room. Plates rattled on tables. For a moment, silence. Then the tension snapped like a whip. Don't just stand there, Vinny roared, his voice breaking with fury. Take him down! 3 more thugs rushed forward. The room exploded into chaos. Chairs toppled. Silverware clinked to the ground. Customers screamed and pressed themselves against the walls, desperate to stay out of the way. The first of the 3 swung wildly at Daniel. He ducked low, grabbed a steel tray from a nearby table, and used it to deflect the punch. The sound rang metallic sharp, and Daniel shoved the tray upward, catching the thug under the chin. Blood sprayed as the man staggered backward into a booth. Another thug charged from the side. Daniel spun on his heel, delivering a low kick to the man's knee. A sickening crack echoed, followed by a howl of pain as the attacker crumpled. The third, bigger than the rest, with a snake tattoo crawling up his neck, tried to grab Daniel from behind. But Daniel twisted sharply, locking the man's arm and slamming him face first into the counter, the wood-splintered salt shakers toppling as the man slid limp to the floor. Holy hell, Nicky whispered, his phone trembling in his hands as he filmed. His eyes were wide, caught between fear and awe. The diner looked like a battlefield now. Broken dishes littered the floor. Chairs were overturned, tables shoved aside, people pressed into corners. 5 of the thugs lay groaning on the ground, incapacitated. And still Daniel stood calm, barely winded, his chest rising and falling with quiet control. His eyes locked on Vinny. The mob boss's smirk was gone. His face was twisted, his scar twitching with rage. Slowly he reached into his jacket and drew a switchblade, the steel glinting in the fluorescent light. His hand shook, but his voice tried to mask it with venom. You're dead, soldier. You hear me? Dead. Daniel didn't move, didn't waver. His reply was a single line of ice. You're done threatening these people. Vinny lunged, slashing the blade toward Daniel's chest. But Daniel stepped aside, catching the wrist and twisting with brutal efficiency. The knife clattered to the floor, sliding under a table. Daniel drove his knee into Vinny's gut, forcing the air from his lungs, then yanked him down, pinning him with a knee on his back. Stay down, Daniel growled, his voice vibrating with controlled fury. You're under arrest! Elena gasped, her hands flying to her mouth, tears springing to her eyes. Anthony, still at the counter, stared with awe, his earlier anger replaced with stunned respect. Around the diner, people whispered in disbelief. From the floor, Vinny spat blood, his voice hoarse but defiant. You think this changes anything? You've just made yourself a dead man walking. Daniel pressed harder with his knee, his gaze unwavering. Keep talking. It's not my face on the pavement. Call the police. Daniel commanded, glancing toward Elena. She nodded, fumbling for the phone on the wall. Her voice shook as she spoke into the receiver. "This is Veterans Haven on Taylor Street. We've been attacked mobsters." One man stopped them. "Please, hurry." Sirens began to wail in the distance, faint but growing louder. In the booth, Nicky clutched his phone like a lifeline, whispering to himself as the recording played back. "He's real. He's a legend." Daniel didn't reply. His focus remained on the mob boss beneath his knee, on the threat still coiled like a viper in the man's glare. For all the chaos, all the noise, he was steady as stone, just as he had been in rain, snow, and blistering heat, standing guard where silence was sacred. But this wasn't Arlington. This was Chicago. And tonight he had chosen his stand. Before the bat ever whistled past Daniel O'Connor's shoulder, before the glass rattled in the doorframe, and 7 men blotted out the light. The day had seemed honest, hot, and golden, and loud with the particular kind of hope that clings to a Saturday in Chicago. He came in from Taylor Street with the sun at his back and the city breathing around him, vendors singing the day's specials from sidewalk carts, a radio spilling Sinatra from somewhere above a tailor shop, the scent of garlic and roasted peppers joining traffic exhaust in a strange, familiar perfume. Daniel wore a plain navy t-shirt and a ball cap that cast a small harbor of shade across his eyes. He didn't look like someone a city would remember, and he liked it that way. A red, white, and blue placard in the diner window read, "Veterans Haven." Below it hung a fading photo of a Marine corporal and an Army nurse cutting a ribbon the day the place opened. He paused at the door, fingers brushing the flat, cool oval tucked in his pocket, the small silver badge no one in this neighborhood needed to see, and stepped inside. Air conditioning washed over him. The diner's glow felt like a chapel of stainless steel chrome stools, a long counter booths upholstered in cherry vinyl polished to a shine. Above the pass-through window, a stars and stripes hung in a respectful droop. The walls carried frames, sepia faces in uniforms, patches under glass, a shadow box filled with campaign ribbons. Somebody's father or uncle once bled for. Between the frames were handwritten notes. "Thank you for the coffee, Elena," and a yellowing newspaper clipping about a scholarship the diner funds for vets going back to school. "Afternoon," said the man behind the counter. He was in his early 60s, silver hair bristled, neat sleeves rolled to show a Marine globe and anchor tattoo softened by time. His left arm didn't quite straighten. "You look like you've been standing in the sun, little bit," Daniel said. He kept the drawl out of his voice, kept the weight of where he'd been out of his eyes. "Seat yourself." "Anywhere but the stool with the wobble," the man said, grinning. "Name's Anthony Russo. Welcome to the Haven." Daniel slid into the corner booth with the wall at his back. Old habit. One eye to the door, a clean line to the kitchen, the reflection of the front windows caught in the chrome napkin holder, so he could watch the sidewalk without staring. A laminated menu waited for him. Beside it, a thick glass of ice water sweating onto a paper napkin. A woman shouldered through the swinging kitchen door, balancing 3 cups of coffee on a tray with the kind of grace only long practice can buy. Her hair was pulled back gray at the temples, skin sun-warmed and kind. "You must be new," she said, eyes quick and curious. "I'm Elena. Best beef in the city. Of course everyone says that. Except they're lying, and we're not." Daniel smiled. "Then I'm in the right place." "Anthony, stop hovering," she said over her shoulder. "Let the man breathe," to Daniel. "What'll you have, hun? Italian beef," he said. "Hot giardiniera if you've got it." "Any other way'd be a sin," she said, and vanished into the steam and clangor. Anthony refilled a farmer's coffee down the counter, then came back wiping his hands on a clean towel. He eyed Daniel's posture without making a big thing of it. "You from around here?" "Passing through," Daniel said. "Visiting." Visiting, Anthony repeated like he was rolling the word around for hidden meanings. "Iraq 91 for me." "Don't let the gray hair fool you. Elena was a nurse there, been trying to keep the lights on and the coffee hot ever since." "You've built something steady," Daniel said, and meant it. A place like this only worked because someone decided it should, day after day after day. The bell above the door jingled as a man brought in his 2 little girls, both in Cubs caps, giggling about the size of the milkshakes. Life moving in its small good ways. Daniel let his shoulders ease a fraction and took a breath that smelled like fresh bread. Elena returned with a plate that steamed like a July sidewalk after a sudden rain. The beef was piled high on a roll that threatened surrender juice pooling peppers bright as confetti. Careful, she warned, setting it down. The first bite's like a first kiss. Hot. Messy. You'll think about it later. Ma Anthony groaned, blushing. What she said deadpan. It's true. Daniel laughed an actual laugh, not the polite echoes he sometimes offered strangers to make them comfortable. He thanked her and lifted the sandwich. The bread was soft and resilient, the beef rich, the peppers a clean fire. For several quiet seconds he ate with the contented silence of a man who'd earned the right to taste something good and uncomplicated. Where you serve, Anthony asked after a moment, not prying, not fishing for war stories. Just the polite crossing of bridges veterans build for each other. Here and there, Daniel said. He offered a sliver of truth. Old guard. Anthony's eyebrows rose in respect. DC. Huh. I took Elena once. We stood at the fence at Arlington and watched those boys walk the mat. Sun so hot we felt it through the rail. Never seen anything like it. That silence. He shook his head. Makes a man think about things he forgot to remember. Daniel held his gaze for a beat. Yes, sir. You know, Anthony said softer now. We try to make a little of that? He gestured around the diner live here. Not the silence, maybe. This city doesn't allow it. But the respect. Nobody eats alone if we can help it. Price cut for anyone with a VA card. Elena bakes extra on holidays we know are tough. It's a small thing. Small things keep people standing, Daniel said. From the kitchen came a clatter, and Elena's voice lifted in a cheerful scold. A teenager in an apron thin as a fishing pole hair under a backwards cap burst out with a tray of cannoli like he was late to his own party. He dodged a bus tub and slid the plate onto a table like a shortstop. Nailed it, he said to no one in particular. God help us, Elena said fondly. Nicky, slow down before you hydroplane. The kid skidded to a halt at Daniel's booth. New guy, he announced, eyes bright. You on, Tick. Nicky Anthony warned. Talk the kid finished, smaller, chastened. Then he grinned. Kidding, kind of. I'm Nicky. Grandma says I talk like I'm double parked, Pleasure, Daniel said. The kid's grin softened into something shy. You a vet? Something like that. Nicky nodded, satisfied with new membership in a club he only half understood. He glanced toward the window, and for just a second something shuddered across his face. He bent closer to his grandmother when she approached to refill Daniel's water, speaking low enough most people would miss it. Daniel wasn't most people. They were on the corner again, Nicky murmured. Two of them. The one with the neck tattoo. Elena's smile didn't falter, but the skin around her eyes tightened. In a minute, she said a gentle warning. It's Saturday, Nicky said. He said Saturdays. Anthony's towel stilled in his hand. He set it down very carefully like he'd just realized it might be a live wire. His voice, when it came, was even. Nicky, go in back. Help Nonna with the tiramisu. I can... The kid began pride flaring. Now Anthony said gentle but firm. Nicky went, but not before he cast a last worried glance at the front glass where the street swung past in reflected stripes of sky and car and passerby. He shouldered through the kitchen door. The room breathed again, but the air had shifted a few degrees colder. Elena fussed with Daniel's water she didn't need to fuss with. Kids, she said too brightly. They see shadows and call them wolves. Anthony's jaw worked. Wolves are real, he said quietly, for Elena's ears and Daniel's if he happened to be listening. Daniel took another bite, chewed, swallowed. He set the sandwich down and dabbed at a streak of au jus with the edge of the bread. He didn't look at Anthony when he asked the question. You expecting company? Elena bristled. Pride rode up her spine. We handle our affairs. Daniel nodded once, accepting that answer with the respect it deserved. Not everyone wants a stranger's hand in their fight, least of all a family that spent years standing on its own feet. He finished his water and let the cold work down his throat before he spoke again. This is a good place, he said. Feels like it takes care of people. That's the idea, Anthony said. He managed a smile that almost made it all the way to his eyes. Because the city doesn't do it for you, not always. They let the small talk float again. Cubs chances roadwork on Halstead the best shortcut to the expressway if you don't mind a pothole that'll swallow a hubcap. A man swept into a booth with the day's paper, a nurse in scrubs wolfed down a late lunch. A pair of teenagers shared fries and the shy electricity of first love. The normalcy set its anchor again, and Daniel let himself drift on it just for a minute. He took the last bite of his sandwich slower, like he wanted to stretch the moment. It tasted like a promise the day made to itself that if you keep your head down and do your work, the world will leave you be. He knew better, but he honored the promise anyway. When he finished, Elena slid a small white dish onto his table, a single cannolo dusted with sugar, the ricotta shining. On the house, she said, daring him to argue. I didn't. You did, she said. You listened. That counts. He picked up the cannolo and broke it in half, the shell crackling. So does tending what's yours. They looked at each other for a second that carried more weight than the words around it. Elena blew a hair from her face and went to refill the coffee of the farmer at the counter. Anthony turned to ring up a check, his stiff arm careful on the register. Daniel leaned back. The silver oval in his pocket warmed to his palm when his fingers found it. He didn't pull it out. No one needed to see it for it to be true. He thought of the mat at Arlington and the line cut into it by a million disciplined steps. He thought of heat and snow and the precise geometry of duty. He thought, too, of his father. How the old man had said once in that kitchen in Ohio that being a soldier isn't something you stop being just because the shooting does. You stand, his father had said so, other people don't have to. The bell above the door jingled. Not a hard slam, just a ripple of sound. A couple left laughing about something on the radio. The world seemed to decide to keep going. Nicky slipped back out of the kitchen with a dish towel slung over his shoulder and a brave face stapled on. He moved to clear a table he'd already cleared. Elena flicked a crumb at him, and he ducked, grinning despite himself. Daniel stood to stretch, dropped a few bills by the glass, and gave Anthony a nod that meant thanks and something else older than that. Good food, he said. I'll be back through. You do that, Anthony said. We'll hold you to it. Daniel turned slightly toward the door, the outside glare painting the floor in rectangles. He paused, vibration almost a small tremor through the mood of the room. It traveled the way a rumor does, fast and invisible. Grandma Nicky said, not loud, not quite steady. He was looking out the window. They're here. The sound that came with the words wasn't the gentle chime of a bell. It was something heavier, a shove against a quiet life. The glass rattled in the frame. 7 shadows fell across the threshold and lengthened down the diner's bright floor like evening had arrived on a single step. Daniel didn't turn right away. He let his breath settle into that quiet place inside him. He felt for the oval badge again, but didn't draw it, not yet. He squared his shoulders and took his place in the corner booth, not to hide, but to see to measure. The promise the day had made to him, the promise of being left alone, broke cleanly without apology. He lifted his eyes and watched the wolves come in. The door didn't swing. This time it slammed a crack against the frame that made every plate rattle on the tables. 7 men spilled into the diner like poison poured into a clean glass. Their swagger wasn't casual. It was rehearsed, a performance sharpened by years of intimidation. They fanned out with slow, deliberate steps, shoulders brushing chairs, eyes scanning faces. The smell of cheap cologne and tobacco drifted in with them, drowning the scent of Elena's roasted peppers still hanging in the air. The leader, Vincent Vinny Caruso, entered last, and he did it like a man walking onto a stage he owned. Mid-40s, slick black suit hair, lacquered flat, and that scar thin and pale slashing across his cheek. His smile was all teeth and no warmth. Behind him, his crew looked like they'd been carved from the alleys of the city leather jackets, thick gold chains, shirts, loud enough to shout for them. Each bore tattoos creeping up their necks like ivy, strangling brick. Anthony Russo froze behind the counter, his hand still on the register from the last order. His stiff arm trembled once before he forced it to steadiness. Elena, emerging from the kitchen with a coffee pot, stopped short, her face tightening, but her back straight. Across the room, parents pulled their kids close. An old man in a Vietnam vet cap whispered something under his breath, his fingers trembling as they tightened on his cane. Daniel O'Connor didn't move. He sat in his corner booth, eyes on Vinny. He didn't need to shift or posture. His presence was enough calm, steady a mountain in the middle of a storm. Anthony. My friend Vinny said, his voice a velvet glove stretched over iron. His polished shoes clicked against the linoleum as he sauntered toward the counter. It's that time again. Anthony's jaw clenched. We paid you last month, Caruso. Business is slow. Slow? Vinny laughed, the sound sharp and ugly. He gestured with a sweep of his hand at the booths. Place looks busy to me. Don't play me for a fool. His gaze flicked to Anthony's left arm, the crooked one. What you and your gimpy wing think you can stiff me? Elena's voice cut in calm but firm. Vinny, please. We've done what you asked. We can't keep living like this. You're bleeding us dry. Vinny's eyes slid to her, narrowing. He smiled, cruel and deliberate. Honest, Elena. Still trying to play the saint. He leaned across the counter, his scar twitching. Listen close. You don't pay, we make things messy. You wouldn't want the people here to see a mess, would you? The shaved-headed thug beside him slammed his hand against the counter, rattling the register. Open it, he barked. His other hand dipped inside his jacket, pulling free a wooden bat. Anthony stepped forward, his voice loud and unshaken. I fought in Fallujah. You think I'm scared of a punk with a bat? The thug sneered, hefting the weapon. Big talk for a crippled Marine. That was when Daniel moved. The scrape of his chair against the tile was louder than the bat smacking into the counter. The sound made heads whip toward the corner. He stood slowly, deliberately, his frame cutting a clean line of shadow against the booth. That's enough, Daniel said. His voice wasn't raised, but it carried firm commanding, leaving no room for dismissal. The diner froze. Even the hum of the refrigeration unit seemed to pause. Vinny turned, sizing him up with a smirk curling his lips. And who the hell are you supposed to be, somebody's bodyguard? Sit down, soldier boy. This ain't your fight. Daniel's eyes never left his. I said back off. You're done here. The gang laughed, their voices too loud, too forced. But beneath the mockery there was unease, a subtle edge that rippled among them. Something about the man's stillness, the way he didn't flinch, made them hesitate. Nicky, peeking from behind the counter, fumbled with his phone, hitting record with trembling hands. His whisper carried across the room like a secret. He's gonna do something. Holy crap. Vinny tilted his head, studying Daniel. You've got a death wish. You even know who I am. Daniel's hand slipped into his pocket. The crew stiffened, expecting steel. What he pulled out wasn't a gun, but a badge, a small silver emblem glinting under the fluorescent lights. He held it up steady as though it carried the weight of a flag. My name is Daniel O'Connor, he said. Sentinel of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. I've sworn to protect what's right, and what you're doing here, it's as wrong as it gets. The words fell heavy, reverberating through the diner. Anthony's eyes widened. Elena clutched her apron hope, flaring in her chest. Even the old man in the veteran's cap straightened, recognition burning in his face. Vinny's smirk snapped back, brittle as glass. A tomb guard. He laughed, the sound hollow. You march in circles for dead guys. This ain't a parade ground, pal. This is Chicago. He jerked his chin at his men. Get him! Two thugs surged forward, bat raised, knife flashing. Daniel stood still until the last possible moment, every muscle coiled, every breath measured. Then he moved, swift, precise, unstoppable. And in that instant, the wolves realized the sheepdog had been waiting for them all along. The first thug came fast, the bat whistling through the air like it wanted to tear the room apart. Daniel O'Connor sidestepped with the grace of a man who had rehearsed violence until it became instinct. His hand shot up, seized the thug's wrist, and twisted until tendons screamed. The bat clattered onto the tiles, spinning out of reach. With one precise strike to the man's chest, Daniel knocked the wind from him. The gangster dropped to his knees, clutching his ribs like they were caving in. The second thug slashed with a knife, the blade catching the overhead light. Gasps erupted from the booths. Mothers shielded their children. Elena's hand went to her mouth. Daniel caught the attacker's wrist mid-swing, redirected the motion, and flipped him flat onto the floor with a sharp crack. The blade skittered harmlessly across the diner. For a second, the air held still. The customers, trapped between terror and astonishment, looked on. Then Vinny Caruso's voice broke the silence, dripping with venom. What the hell are you waiting for? Take him! The remaining four thugs lunged together, the room erupting into chaos. A wild punch came first. Daniel ducked, snatched a metal tray from a nearby table, and used it to block the blow. The sound rang sharp metallic. With the same momentum, he slammed the tray upward into the thug's chin. The man stumbled backward, blood dribbling from his mouth. Another thug rushed in from Daniel's right, trying to grab him around the waist. Daniel spun low and sharp and drove a kick into the man's knee. The joint buckled with a sickening crack. The thug screamed, collapsing onto the floor, hands clutching his shattered leg. The third attacker lunged from behind his arms like iron bands. But Daniel twisted, locked one arm, and slammed him face first into the counter. Salt shakers, napkin holders, and silverware crashed to the floor. The man groaned, sliding down in a heap. That left the largest one, a hulking man with a tattoo crawling up his neck like a black serpent. He roared, charging headlong the floor, shaking beneath his boots. Daniel didn't retreat. He met the charge straight on, grabbing a fistful of the thug's shirt and using his own momentum to heave him over a table. Dishes shattered, coffee spilled, and the man crashed to the floor, groaning. The diner was unrecognizable chairs, overturned glass shattered the smell of sweat and fear mixing with the aroma of roasted beef. Customers cowered against the walls, their faces pale, but their eyes fixed on the lone figure who stood in the middle of it all. Daniel O'Connor, calm, unflinching chest rising with steady breaths, looked every inch the Sentinel he had once been on the sacred mat of Arlington. Only Vinny remained standing. His smirk was gone. His bravado cracked. He pulled a switchblade from his jacket, flicking it open with a trembling hand. His voice was jagged, trying to stitch his authority back together. "You think you're some kind of hero? You don't know what you've walked into. I'll carve you up." Daniel's reply came low and cold. "You're done threatening these people. Drop it." Vinny lunged. The blade flashed a silver streak in the fluorescent light. Daniel pivoted, catching his wrist twisting until the knife clattered to the floor. His knee drove into Vinny's gut, forcing the mob boss to gasp and fold. With one brutal motion, Daniel yanked him down and pinned him against the tile, his own knee grinding between Vinny's shoulder blades. The diner was dead silent, the kind of silence that follows thunder. "Stay down," Daniel growled. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of command drilled into him by years of service. "It's over." From behind the counter, Elena gasped, tears streaking her cheeks. Anthony stared at Daniel with a mixture of awe and disbelief, his crooked arm trembling at his side. Nicky phone, still clutched tight, whispered into the lens like a commentator calling history. "Holy crap! He's not just a soldier, he's a legend." Daniel didn't look up. He kept his weight on Vinny, the badge of a tomb guard still glinting faintly in his hand. Around him the fallen groaned, but none dared rise. The wolf pack had been scattered, and in its place the quiet power of honor stood unyielding. "Call the police," Daniel said, his voice calm but cutting through the stunned silence. Elena snapped to action, fumbling for the phone on the wall. "This is Veterans Haven," she said breathlessly into the receiver. "We've been attacked by Caruso's men." But someone stopped them. "Please hurry." Outside, sirens began to wail, faintly growing closer with each passing second. And in that small Chicago diner, the line between a quiet meal and a battlefield had been erased by one man who had chosen to stand. For a heartbeat after the knife skittered under the table and Vinny hit the tile, the diner held its breath. The kind of hush that follows a lightning strike. People stared at Daniel O'Connor like they were seeing a statue step off a pedestal and start breathing. Then sound returned in fragments, a baby's thin cry, a coffee cup settling with a porcelain click. Elena whispering a prayer she hadn't said since a field hospital tent in another country. Another life. Anthony steadied himself against the register with his good arm, a line of sweat bright on his temple. Nicky, half behind the counter, kept filming his phone, tremoring in his grip, the red timer in the corner ticking toward proof. "Don't touch the knife," Daniel said evenly, not looking up from the weight he kept on Vinny's shoulders. "Don't move anything. We need this scene clean." Elena nodded fast, like she'd been given an order in a triage line. "Anthony, back door," she said. "Lock it." Her voice carried competence through fear. This woman had kept men alive with less time and worse tools. Vinny coughed, spat blood onto the tile, and tried to gather the rags of his dignity around him. You've got no idea who you're messing with, he rasped. You think this city's going to clap for some marching soldier? You think they'll thank you? Daniel shifted his weight just enough to coax a grunt out of him, a reminder, not an escalation. Stay still, he said. You'll breathe easier. One of the downed thugs with a snapped knee moaned, the sound crawling up out of him like a broken siren. Daniel cut a glance to Elena. Towels, he said. Clean. We'll stabilize until EMS gets here. Elena was already moving, tearing a stack of bar towels from a shelf and dropping to the floor beside the injured man. She worked with fast, efficient hands, binding above the knee, keeping pressure steady without anger. You did something stupid, she murmured to him. Not unkind. Doesn't mean you don't deserve help. The old man in the Vietnam cap levered himself to his feet with his cane and hobbled 2 steps closer as if proximity itself might add some scrap of usefulness. You need me, son, he asked Daniel, voice gravelly. You standing is plenty, Daniel said, and the old man's spine straightened another inch. Anthony made it to the back door and threw the deadbolt. He came back up the aisle with his jaw set so tight the muscles jumped. His eyes fell on the knife under the table, then on the bat near the counter, then on the smear of blood that looked obscene against the white tile. For a second, the crooked left arm that had always betrayed him looked like it wanted to punch through stone. Hey, Daniel said quietly, catching his eye. Look at me. Anthony did. You kept this place all these years, Daniel said. You stood. Today, too. Don't let him take that from you with words. Anthony breathed once a controlled inhale, like he was lifting something heavy. He nodded. Copy that, he said, and it came out like a Marine talking to a corporal, and then like a husband answering the woman he loves when she says it's going to be all right. From outside, the sirens grew louder, not yet at the curb, but painting the block in their approach. The sound threaded into the diner and curled around everyone's nerves. Phones rose. A couple of patrons edged toward the windows, then thought better of it and retreated. Nicky, still filming, whispered, "They're almost here," like he needed to narrate it to believe it. The kid's face was pale but bright with something fierce and loyal. He was the kind who would stand behind a camera because he wasn't allowed to stand in front of a fight. Daniel understood that boy all the way down to the root. Back up that video, Daniel said to him. Now. Airdrop to your grandma, email it to yourself, upload to a cloud. Multiple copies. And turn off auto-delete, no optimizing storage that dumps it. Nicky blinked. Yeah. Okay. He started tapping thumbs, suddenly nimble. I got the first swing that threats the bat. Everything. I got where you said back off. I got the knife. Good, Daniel said. Keep that phone on you. Vinny shifted under his knee and hissed. You think phones save you? This is my street soldier. Boys you haven't met are going to be waiting where you drink, where you sleep. You don't live here. You don't know the rules. Daniel considered the floor tile by Vinny's cheek a pale nick in the glaze where someone had dropped a plate years ago. He could feel his own pulse slow measured like footfalls on a ceremonial mat. Elsewhere in a different uniform, he had learned to let adrenaline crash against rock and drain away. Rules, he said, almost to himself. You collect fear. I collect witnesses. Anthony bristled. Get him out of my place, he snapped before catching himself. Sorry. I just sorry. You're fine, Daniel said. Anger's honest. He raised his voice just enough to reach the cowering cluster near the door. If you were threatened, if you saw the first strike, the knife when the officers arrive, stay to give a statement. If you need to go, at least give your name and number. Don't let fear walk out with you. A woman with a baby on her hip nodded, eyes wet. We'll stay, she said. He saved us. In the kitchen window, a line cook with tattoos up both arms peered out, eyes big as saucers. Yo, Miss Elena, he called, trying for humor, and almost getting there. You didn't tell me lunch came with a movie. It didn't. Elena said sharply. Then, softer, Thank God. The hulking man Daniel had flipped over a table, made the kind of sound that meant he was considering heroism the stupid way. Daniel turned his head just enough for his gaze to meet the man's. Bad choice, he said, calm as a church. The man read what lived behind those words and settled back onto his elbows, rethinking his life. Sirens swelled, then flared right outside, washing the windows with red-blue pulses. The diner's noise stuttered into silence again, as if everyone wanted to look as innocent as they could when the law walked in. The bell over the door trembled once from air pressure and then went still. "You listen to me," Vinny whispered, trying for snake and landing on cornered dog. "You walk out of here and you're done. There's always another night. You don't get to be a hero twice." Daniel's answer wore no costume at all. "I don't do it for the cheer," he said. "I do it because I was taught to stand where it's hardest." He lifted his head to the room at large. Hands visible when officers enter. Nobody plays lawyer. We tell the truth, we let the video talk. Anthony planted himself near the end of the counter like the sergeant of his own small command. Elena Towell's blood-marked rose and washed her hands in scalding water, dried them, and squared her shoulders. Nicky tucked his phone into his back pocket like a relic and stood next to his grandmother, chin raised. The bell chimed, and 2 officers swept in with the momentum of men who weren't sure what they were about to see, but had seen plenty already. The younger one, barely 30, with a buzz cut and sincerity stamped on his face, took in the wreckage, the overturned chairs, the broken plates, the men on the floor, the woman with the blood on her hands that wasn't hers, and his palm hovered an inch above his holster, like a bird unsure where to land. The older one, late 40s, with road miles around the eyes, didn't move his hand to his gun at all. He took it in with one long blink that said he wasn't surprised by the world anymore. "Chicago PD," the older officer announced, voice steady. "Everybody stay where you are. Hands visible." Daniel eased some of his weight off Vinny's shoulders, but not enough to make a liar of himself. He spoke with clarity and no heat. "My name is Daniel O'Connor. United States Army Old Guard, Sentinel of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. I intervened when these men attempted to extort the owners and assaulted patrons. The knife is under that table. The bat is by the counter. Evidence hasn't been touched. Multiple witnesses. Video exists." The younger officer's eyes darted to Daniel's hands, to the small silver badge he held, a fraction into view, to the calmness that felt like a warm front driving out a storm. The older officer, his name tag read, Morales let out a breath that might have been relief, might have been appreciation. "Okay," Morales said the syllables like a landing gear catching clean. "We're going to do this by the book." He jerked his chin at the younger officer. "Daniel's weapons first." Daniels nodded, moving carefully to kick the knife farther out into open space and slip a pen through the loop of the switchblade before bagging it. He squatted to the bat, tagged it, bagged it, and refrained from looking too long at the broken knee beyond it. Morales addressed the room. "If you saw what happened, we need names and statements. If you were threatened or assaulted, say so. If you recorded anything, please keep it safe and make a copy for us. We'll need it." He spoke like a man who had said these words in places with less light and more fear. Nicky shot his hand up like he was in a classroom, and the test question had finally been one he'd studied for. "I got the whole thing," he said, stepping forward. "Start to finish." Morales smiled at him, brief reel. "That's gonna help, kid." Vinny tried one last time, voice oily. "Detective, you know me. You know who I am. This is all a misunderstanding. My men came in to eat this psycho." Morales didn't look at him. "Shut up, Mr. Caruso," he said, not unkindly, and it landed like a door closing. Daniel shifted his knee off Vinny's shoulders at Morales' nod and rose in one fluid motion that left no fingerprints on the air. He stepped back, palms open, giving the officers clean access to do what they needed to do. It was the same choreography he'd practiced 1,000 times, marching from shadow to sun, and back again, precision in movement, respect layered over strength. As Daniel snapped cuffs on Vinny and read him rights, the room exhaled in ragged concert. The baby stopped crying. Someone near the door laughed once, surprised by the sound. Elena pressed her hand to her chest and found her heartbeat still there, stubborn and steady. "Sergeant," she said, voice finding itself. "He saved us." Morales tipped his chin in Daniel's direction. "Seems like he did." He turned to Daniel. "Hell of a vacation you're having, Sentinel." Daniel let the ghost of a smile touch his face. "I've had worse winters." Morales chuckled low, appreciative, and then his professionalism slid back into place. "You got time to give me a statement before you disappear. I'll give you whatever you need," Daniel said. He glanced at the Russos, then husband, wife, grandson, and they looked back like a family measuring a providence they hadn't expected today. Outside, the blue-red lights strobed against the glass. Inside, the diner felt for the first time since the door had slammed like a place again. Not a battlefield. A room where people ate and drank and were seen. Daniel rolled his shoulders, once easing muscle back under skin. The adrenaline that had burned so clean in his veins settled into a hum. He could feel the old lesson seat itself in him again. You stand until it's safe to sit. You hold the line until the line can hold itself. Okay, Morales said, voice pitched for calm. Let's make sense of this. And as pens came out and voices steadied into testimony and steel bracelets clicked closed on the wrists of men who thought they owned a block. Daniel O'Connor did what he had always done. He stood his post until the next man took it from him. The air outside the diner pulsed red and blue sirens, fading to a low murmur as the first squad cars settled against the curb. Crowds had already started to gather, neighbors, passers-by, curious faces drawn by the commotion. Some pressed up close to the windows, hands cupped against the glass. Others stood in the street, whispering, pointing phones raised. Chicago always had an appetite for spectacle. Inside, the spell of terror had broken, but its shards still lingered in every corner. The Russo's diner smelled of coffee grease and adrenaline. The overturned chairs and shattered plates bore silent witness to the violence that had swept through. Anthony Russo, his crooked arm hanging stiff at his side, braced against the counter. Elena pressed both palms into the wood as if to steady the room itself. Nicky hovered near her, his phone trembling in his grip, still recording. Daniel O'Connor remained standing in the center posture, unshaken eyes steady. He looked like a man cut from the same stone that built monuments, silent, immovable, carved by years of discipline. Around him, groaning thugs littered the floor, sprawled in broken arrogance. Officer Daniels knelt to finish cuffing the last of the fallen men, reading rights with a shaky voice that betrayed his youth. Sergeant Morales, older and sharper, circled the scene with the practiced calm of a man who had stitched chaos into order before. His gaze lingered on Daniel longer than necessary, not suspicious, just measuring. All right, Morales said, voice steady. We've got Caruso and his boys. EMS is on the way for the injuries. Everyone else stay put until we get your statements. We'll need names, numbers, what you saw, what you heard. He turned his head toward Daniel. You've done half our work tonight. Hell of a job. But I still need your account on record. Daniel gave a small nod. Of course, Sergeant. I'll cooperate fully. Anthony stepped forward, his jaw tight, words heavy with gratitude. Sergeant, this man, he saved us. Caruso's been bleeding us for months. We've tried to hold on, but... He trailed off, swallowing hard. Without him, this place, we might not be standing here. Elena added, her voice quivering but fierce. He didn't just save us. He saved every person in here. You should have seen how fast they folded when he stood up. Morales raised a hand, calming them gently. I see it, and we'll make sure it's documented. His eyes flicked to Nicky. That phone, you still got what happened? Yes, sir. Nicky nodded, clutching it like a holy relic, start to finish. I backed it up, twice. Morales almost smiled. Smart kid. From the floor, Vinnie Caruso spat blood and venom in equal measure. You think some damn video changes the game? You think this makes you heroes? I run this block. You lock me up, I'll be out before the ink's dry. And when I am... Shut up, Morales said flatly, not even looking his way. The authority in his tone was enough to silence the room again. Daniel studied Vinny without anger, without triumph, just calculation. You're finished, he said simply, his voice carrying the weight of truth. One way or another. Morales gestured to two more officers who had just entered. Get these clowns outside, squad cars are waiting. Bag every weapon log, every piece of evidence. Daniels, you ride with Caruso. As the officers hauled the groaning thugs' upright metal cuffs, clinking, the crowd outside swelled. Murmurs grew into shouts. They got Caruso, someone yelled from the sidewalk. About time. Another voice rose. Who took him down? The answer rippled quick. Fingers pointed toward the diner, toward the tall figure standing calm in the wreckage. The chant began in pieces, broken by disbelief at first. That's the guy, he did it, took 'em all down. Phones lifted higher. The crowd pressed closer, hungry for a glimpse. Inside, Elena clasped Daniel's arm suddenly, her grip firm despite the tremor in her fingers. "You hear that?" she whispered, tears in her eyes. "They're cheering for you." Daniel shook his head once, a faint smile tugging at his lips, but never quite reaching his eyes. "I'm just passing through." Anthony stepped forward, voice thick. "No, son. You're one of us now." "You stood up when no one else could." Daniel looked away, his gaze catching on the American flag hung above the counter, its fabric rippling faintly in the draft from the door. He thought of the silence at Arlington, the weight of his oath, the endless march of honor where no crowds cheered. Tonight was different, but it was the same duty. Always the same. Morales approached, pen poised over his notepad. "Sentinel," he said quietly. "I don't know what sent you to Chicago, but you picked the right diner to sit down in. You'll have the city's thanks before long. Maybe more attention than you want." Daniel's reply was measured, firm. "I don't need attention, Sergeant. I just need these people safe." Morales nodded slowly. "That you've done." He looked around the wreckage. "Now let's make sure it sticks." The officers dragged Vinny and his crew through the door out into the night, where the crowd roared with disbelief and approval. The flash of cameras lit the street like fireworks. Vinny shouted curses, promises of vengeance, but his voice was drowned by the wave of voices celebrating his downfall. Inside, Daniel stood motionless, the weight of the moment pressing in on him. The Russos, their customers, the strangers who had witnessed it all, they looked at him not with fear now, but with reverence. For the first time that night, Daniel allowed himself to breathe. The squad car's doors slammed outside, muffled thumps against the roar of a restless crowd. The diner windows flickered with the red-blue pulse of the light bars, shadows stretching and collapsing across the cracked linoleum. Inside, the noise dimmed to a fragile hush. The predators had been dragged away, but the weight of their presence lingered like smoke after a fire. Sergeant Morales planted himself at the counter, pen in hand, leather notebook open. His face, weathered but watchful, carried the quiet focus of a man used to piecing order from chaos. He looked around the diner, his eyes moving from the overturned chairs to the shaken patrons, then finally settling on Daniel O'Connor. "All right," Morales said, his voice level. "Let's make this clean. I'll need a statement from each of you. Names, contact info, what you saw. We'll document everything." He tapped the pen against the page. "O'Connor, we'll start with you." Daniel inclined his head. He moved with deliberate calm, stepping around broken dishes and the bodies of thugs now groaning in cuffs. The hush of the crowd inside followed him to the counter. His shoulders were square, his expression composed as if giving a briefing rather than recounting a brawl that had just shaken the room to its core. "Daniel O'Connor," he said. His voice was steady, clipped. "United States Army, Old Guard, Arlington National Cemetery. I entered this establishment as a customer. Shortly after, 7 men led by Vincent Caruso entered. They threatened the owners, demanded payment. When Mr. Russo refused, one of Caruso's men produced a bat. Another produced a knife. At that point, I intervened to prevent injury or death. I disarmed and subdued them until your arrival." Morales's pen scratched quickly, his head bobbing once or twice. He looked up. "And you've got proof of those weapons," Daniel gestured. "Bat counter. Knife bagged by your officer. Witnesses saw both." He glanced toward Nicky. "Video exists as well." The boy nearly tripped over himself, hurrying forward, his phone held out with both hands like an offering to a king. "I got everything, Sergeant." From when they slammed the door to when Nicky's voice cracked with excitement, when he put Caruso on the floor. Morales took the phone, gently scrolling back through the footage, the glow of the screen lighting his features. The sound of Vinny's threats hissed out from the tiny speaker, followed by the crash of a bat, and Daniel's voice ringing through the diner. "That's enough! Back off!" Morales's eyebrows lifted as he watched the swift dismantling of Caruso's men. "This is gold," Morales murmured. "Caruso's been dodging charges for years. This puts him exactly where he belongs." He handed the phone back. "Make sure you save multiple copies, kid. That video might just break this whole thing open." Nicky grinned, wide pride flooding his pale face. "Already backed it up, sir." Morales almost smiled. "Good work." Elena stepped forward, then, her apron still stained from where she'd wrapped towels around a broken knee. Her voice trembled but held steady. "Sergeant, We've lived under his shadow for too long. He came every month, demanded money we didn't have. Tonight could have ended different if not for Mr. O'Connor. Anthony, his broad chest heaving with restrained anger, added, "This man saved my family. He saved everyone here." A murmur of agreement rippled through the patrons. Heads nodded, voices rose. He stood up. "He protected us. Never seen anything like it." Daniel shifted uncomfortable with the chorus. His eyes dropped to the silver badge in his palm. "I didn't do it for thanks," he said, his tone quiet but firm. "I did it because it was right." Morales studied him for a moment. "Maybe so, but right now this city needs men who'll do the right thing even when it's dangerous. You may not want the attention, Sentinel, but you're about to get it." From outside, the chant began scattered. At first, then louder, stronger. "Who took down Caruso? Who took him down?" The answer spread quick. "The soldier. The soldier in the diner." Phones outside lit up the night, recording the squad cars, the fallen mob boss. Anthony's hand trembled as he reached across the counter and laid it on Daniel's shoulder. His eyes shone with gratitude and something heavier, older. "You may be just passing through sun, but tonight you became part of us." Daniel looked at the man, then at Elena, then at the boy with the phone still clutched to his chest. He gave a small nod but said nothing. Morales closed his notebook with a sharp snap. "All right. We've got enough to bury Caruso in paperwork. EMS will take the injured. We'll escort the rest to holding. You folks sit tight until we're done processing statements." "O'Connor?" He fixed Daniel with a measured look. "Don't disappear just yet. We're going to need you." Daniel inclined his head once more. "Understood." As the officers moved to haul the last thug out, Elena slipped behind the counter, opening a drawer with trembling hands. She pulled out a small box worn smooth with years. From it, she lifted a pin shaped like the Marine Corps emblem, gold, catching the diner's light. She stepped to Daniel, her eyes shining with quiet determination. "This was mine," she said softly. "From the Gulf. I've carried it for decades. Tonight you earned it." She pinned it against his navy shirt just above his heart. Daniel's throat tightened. He touched the pin lightly, reverently. "Thank you, ma'am," he said. "I'll carry it with honor." Around them, the crowd inside began to clap, tentative at first, then louder, swelling into a wave of gratitude that pressed against the diner's walls. Outside, the chant grew louder, the name of a soldier rising above the Chicago night. Daniel stood steady, the silver badge in one pocket, the golden pin over his heart. He had not sought this moment, but he had chosen to stand, and the city for the first time in years felt the weight of a predator lifted from its shoulders. The crowd outside swelled with every passing minute. Word spread faster than sirens, faster than radio chatter. Chicago was whispering to itself, "Caruso's down." The soldier did it. Somebody finally stood up to him. Phones lit the block like fireflies, recording grainy footage of cuffed thugs shoved into squad cars. Inside, the atmosphere pulsed with nervous energy, a current running through every shaken customer pressed against the booths. The place was still a wreck. Shattered mug sauce staining the floor, salt and pepper spilled like dust across the counter. But in that wreckage lay something no one had expected relief. Daniel O'Connor hadn't moved far from where he'd pinned Vinny to the tile. He stood upright now, tall and silent, scanning the room with the same slow calculation he'd used on watch at Arlington. His breathing was steady, his stance composed. He looked less like a man and more like a sentinel carved from stone. Sergeant Morales finished speaking with another witness, jotting notes with clipped precision. Then he approached Daniel, lowering his pen. "You should know, O'Connor, you just made my month. Hell, maybe my year. Caruso's been untouchable, slippery lawyers, paid-off witnesses, intimidation. But you..." Morales's eyes flicked toward Nicky, who clutched his phone like a holy text. "You just handed us the smoking gun." Daniel's reply came quiet, unembellished. It wasn't about that. It was about protecting these people, which Morales said is exactly what this city needs. But don't be surprised if your face winds up on half the news stations before sunrise. Daniel's jaw tightened. He didn't want fame, not the glare of cameras. Duty was supposed to be unseen, silent, the way of the tomb. He glanced at the Russos. Anthony still braced against the counter. Elena, wiping her hands with a towel she hadn't realized was already soaked red from tending wounds, Nikki practically vibrating with pride. This wasn't about him. It was about them and the others who would walk into this diner tomorrow without fear. Anthony crossed the room and put a steadying hand on Daniel's shoulder. His crooked arm hung awkwardly at his side, but his grip was strong. "You saved more than a diner tonight, son. You saved our dignity. Caruso's been bleeding us dry for months. I was ready to shut these doors. But now," his voice broke the words, catching, "now maybe we can keep the lights on." Elena came beside him, her eyes shining. "You gave us back something we thought was gone," she said. "Hope." Daniel inclined his head, swallowing the weight of their gratitude. "I just did what I was trained to do." "Yeah," Anthony said, voice rising. "Then thank God you were trained." A ripple of applause spread through the customers, hesitant at first, then stronger. A veteran in the corner, his cane propped against the wall, rose shakily to his feet. He brought his hand up in a crisp salute, eyes glassy. "Sentinel," he said, his voice rough. "You did us proud tonight." Daniel returned the salute, sharp and precise. The diner erupted in cheers. Outside, the chant caught fire. "The soldier, the soldier." Sirens blended with shouts, with the hum of a neighborhood that had seen too much fear, and finally one act of defiance against it. Officer Daniels, younger and still shaking from adrenaline, leaned against the counter, eyes wide as he watched Daniel. "I've been on the force 3 years," he admitted, almost to himself. "I've never seen anyone move like that. They didn't stand a chance. They never do." Morales said, his tone cutting but not unkind. "Not against someone who knows what he's fighting for." Daniel kept silent, his gaze on the flag behind the counter, the colors lit by the diner's buzzing lights. He thought of the tomb rain, sun, snow, endless march. He thought of names, unknown sacrifices, uncounted. And he thought of tonight not a battlefield, but a diner. Not soldiers in uniform, but civilians who deserved to feel safe. Duty wasn't tied to one ground. It was wherever he chose to make a stand. The EMTs bustled in through the door, then wheeling stretchers. They lifted the groaning thugs with practiced indifference, patching wounds they had no sympathy for. One paused beside Daniel, giving him a long look. "Heard you did a number on these guys," the medic muttered. "Remind me never to sit on your bad side." Daniel didn't answer. He just stepped aside, letting them do their work. The chaos began to ebb. Cuffs clicked. Stretchers rolled out. Morales tucked his notebook into his pocket, clapping Daniel lightly on the arm. "You can head out once you've signed the statement. After that, Sentinel, where you go is your call. But something tells me Chicago won't forget you anytime soon." Daniel nodded once. His eyes lingered on the Russos, on Nikki, who was still gripping that phone like treasure. "Take care of each other," he said quietly. Anthony's voice broke as he replied, "We will. Because of you." Daniel didn't smile, but his eyes softened. Outside, the crowd roared again as Vinnie Caruso was shoved into a cruiser, cursing through bloodied lips. The predator who once owned the block now rode in the back of a squad car like any common criminal. Inside the diner, for the first time in months, maybe years, people felt safe enough to laugh. The cruiser door slammed shut on Vinnie Caruso, and the crowd outside roared like they'd just seen a prizefighter toppled. Phones flashed, people shouted, neighbors poured into the street with disbelief painted across their faces. They got Caruso. Someone yelled, and the words rippled down the block, gathering strength. The man who had terrorized them for years, who walked their sidewalks like he owned them, now sat hunched in the back of a police car with his face bruised and his pride bleeding. Inside Veterans Haven, the applause ebbed into a quiet hum. The patrons sat again slowly, like survivors of a storm still testing the ground under their feet. Coffee cups were uprighted fragments swept into piles, tables righted on their legs. The wreckage was still there, splintered chairs, blood smears on the tile, but so was a new energy, a trembling relief that spread through the room like warmth from a fire. Daniel O'Connor stood by the counter, his tall frame still as stone. He hadn't sought the center of attention, but the room kept circling back to him. People's eyes followed voices lowered when they spoke about him, as though reverence itself had taken a chair among them. Elena approached first, wiping her hands on her apron, even though the stains were set deep. She carried a small box, edges worn smooth by years of handling. Her steps faltered once, but her gaze was clear. She stopped in front of Daniel and opened the box, revealing a gold Marine Corps pin shaped like an eagle globe and anchor. Its metal caught the diner's lights gleaming. "This was mine," she said softly. "From the Gulf. I've kept it close for 30 years. Tonight you earned it." Her hand trembled only slightly as she pinned it against his chest, just above the heart. Daniel's throat tightened, but he held her gaze. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low but certain, "I'll carry it with honor." Anthony stepped beside her, his crooked arm bent at the elbow, as if trying to salute. He settled for a firm grip on Daniel's hand, his voice rough. "I can't repay what you've done. But know this, you've got family here now. Always." The room stirred. The old man with the Vietnam cap stood again, steadier this time, his cane forgotten by his chair. He raised his hand in a crisp salute, tears standing in his eyes. "Sentinel," he said, voice gravelly. "You did us proud tonight." The applause rose again, stronger, echoing against the walls. Patrons clapped, neighbors peered in from the sidewalk and joined the sound, swelling until it seemed too large for the small diner to hold. Nicky broke through the noise, holding up his phone like a torch. "I've already uploaded it," he cried, eyes shining. "The video's online, people are already sharing it. You're going to blow up." Mr. Daniel turned his head, a faint smile touching his lips. "Keep it quiet, kid," he said. "I'm just passing through." But the truth was already out there. Chicago was a city built on stories, and this one would spread like fire, a lone soldier standing up to a mob boss in a diner, protecting a family, protecting strangers. It was a story people needed in a time when fear had its claws deep. Sergeant Morales, who had been overseeing the cuffed men loaded into vans, came back inside. He surveyed the room, the faces glowing, the wreckage still scattered, and shook his head. "You realize," he said to Daniel, "this place is going to be packed every day for the next year. Folks will line up just to eat where a tomb guard put Caruso down." Anthony chuckled, the first real laugh he'd managed in months. "Then I'd better stock more beef." Elena swatted him lightly on the shoulder, but her smile was wet with tears. Daniel said nothing, only touched the Marine pin over his heart. He thought of Arlington, the silence, the precision, the oath. He thought of his father's words, "You stand so others don't have to." Tonight, in this noisy, crowded diner in Chicago, those words had found new ground. Outside, the last squad car pulled away. Vinny's curses drowned beneath cheers. The streetlights glowed against the river of faces. Strangers embraced. A little girl waved an American flag someone had fetched from a storefront. The block for once belonged to the people again. Daniel slipped back into his corner booth for a moment, watching. He let the sound wash over him, not as praise, but as proof. Proof that sometimes one man standing was enough to make a city remember its backbone. The Marine pin pressed cool against his chest. His badge lay heavy in his pocket. Between the two, he felt the weight of the same vow in two different languages, duty and honor. And though he knew he wouldn't stay, couldn't stay, he allowed himself one small breath of peace in a city that suddenly felt lighter. The cheers outside rolled down the block like a wave echoing off brick and glass until the whole neighborhood seemed to vibrate with it. People leaned from upstairs windows, recording with their phones, their voices mixing with the chant, "The soldier, the soldier." Inside the diner pulsed with a different kind of energy. Patrons, still shaken, began to reclaim their seats. A couple resumed their half-finished meals, though they ate with glances constantly darting toward Daniel O'Connor, as if reminding themselves he was still there, a living shield standing among them. Sergeant Morales conferred quietly with his officers near the doorway. His notebook was tucked away now, replaced by the long, tired expression of a cop who knew paperwork would stretch deep into the night. He caught Daniel's eye, gave a short nod of respect, and stepped outside to keep the crowd back. Daniel remained near the counter, one hand brushing the Marine pin Elena had pressed against his chest. He didn't wear it like a trophy, he wore it like a responsibility. Anthony Russo shuffled around the wreckage of his diner, righting a chair with his good arm. He paused, his gaze sweeping the broken glass, the overturned salt shakers, the coffee pooled black on the floor. For months he had watched this place, their place, slowly bend under Caruso's weight. Tonight it had nearly snapped. But because of one man, it still stood. He looked at Daniel, voice rough with emotion. This place was supposed to be a haven. That's why we named it. A spot where vets could sit, swap stories, not worry about the world outside. But Caruso, he turned it into something else. Made us feel small in our own house. Anthony's jaw tightened. You gave it back to us. Elena came beside him, her hands still stained faintly with blood from tending wounds. She set them firmly on the counter, her shoulders squared. People are going to remember tonight, she said. Not just us. The neighborhood, the city. Maybe even beyond. Nicky bounded forward, unable to hold in his excitement. Already happening, he blurted. He spun his phone around, screen glowing. The video's at 20,000 views. Look, comments are flying in. People are saying you're a hero. Hashtags everywhere. Daniel's lips pressed into the ghost of a smile. Don't let it get to your head, kid. Nicky blinked, confused. But it's you. Daniel shook his head gently. No. It's what happened. A community stood up tonight. That's the story. The boy stared for a moment, then nodded reluctantly, though pride still shone in his eyes. From the corner booth, the old veteran with the cane cleared his throat. Mind if I say something? His voice, gravelly but strong, cut through the room. Heads turned. I've seen a lot in my years, too much maybe, but I'll tell you this. What you did here, Sentinel, he tipped his cap toward Daniel. It'll outlive the bruises and the broken glass. Folks will tell their kids about the night one soldier stood up, and it'll remind them what honor looks like. A ripple of agreement spread through the diner. Daniel inclined his head, but his voice was quiet. Honor isn't about applause. It's about standing where you're needed, even if nobody's watching. Anthony reached across the counter and gripped Daniel's forearm, his weathered hand firm. Well, tonight we all watched. And we won't forget. The clatter of boots announced the EMTs wheeling out the last injured thug. The door closed behind them, leaving the diner filled with only its own people. The adrenaline was fading now, replaced by exhaustion, by the shaky relief that comes when danger has passed but memory still lingers. Elena busied herself brewing fresh coffee, pouring mugs for anyone who wanted. On the house, she said firmly, We all need something warm tonight. As the smell of roasted beans filled the room again, normalcy crept back, fragile, tentative, but real. A baby fussed, soothed by its mother. Two teenagers whispered to each other over fries, their laughter uncertain, but returning. The haven lived again. Daniel slipped back into his booth, not to hide, but to give the room space to breathe without his shadow looming. He sat quietly, watching Anthony and Elena, watching Nicky dart between tables with nervous energy, watching neighbors embrace as if reclaiming the space for themselves. For the first time since stepping into Chicago, Daniel allowed himself to feel the weight lift, not completely, but enough. He had stood, the rest would follow. Yet outside, the crowd continued to chant, their voices echoing up the narrow streets, recording, broadcasting, spreading the story farther than any of them could yet imagine. Daniel's fingers brushed the silver badge in his pocket, then the Marine pin over his heart. He knew this wasn't his place to stay. But for tonight, for this block in Little Italy, he had been exactly where he was needed. The red and blue lights faded down the street as the last squad car rolled away, taking Vincent Caruso and his battered crew into the city's custody. Outside, the crowd lingered, unwilling to leave buzzing with the thrill of seeing a bully toppled. Voices carried through the glass snatches of excitement, disbelief, and gratitude. But slowly, one by one, the neighbors drifted back to their stoops, their shops, their homes. Inside Veterans Haven, the air was thick with exhaustion. Adrenaline ebbed into quiet murmurs, the scrape of chairs as people resettled, the clink of coffee cups poured from Elena's pot. The diner looked like a battlefield, frozen in aftermath, blood smears on tile, broken glass, glittering near the booths, a chair leg snapped and leaning against the wall. Yet the room pulsed with a fragile relief. Daniel O'Connor sat once more in the corner booth, posture erect, eyes calm. He did not seek attention, but the weight of every glance still pressed toward him. Customers whispered his name under their breath. The soldier, the sentinel, the one who stood. Sergeant Morales lingered near the counter, finishing a call on his radio. He slid his phone into his pocket, then crossed to Daniel. Your statement's signed, he said. Your part here is done. But you should know what happened tonight won't stay in this diner. It'll be everywhere by morning. Caruso's fall is the headline we've been waiting years for. Daniel inclined his head. Then let the headlines belong to him, not to me. Morales's lips twitched the faintest shadow of a smile. You can't control it. Not anymore. Kid's video. He nodded toward Nikki. That thing will blow up before sunrise. You may not want the spotlight, Sentinel, but it's already burning. Nikki bounded over, unable to contain himself. 200,000 views, he blurted, shoving the phone toward them. His voice cracked with excitement. Comments are flooding in. People are calling you a hero. Someone just said, "This is what America needs again." Daniel studied the boy, steady but kind. Heroes don't ask for hashtags, Nikki. Heroes just stand where they're needed. The boy's face reddened, but he nodded fiercely, gripping the phone tighter. Still, people should know what you did. Elena approached a tray balanced in her hands. On it sat steaming mugs of coffee and slices of her homemade cake. She set it gently on the table, her eyes soft. Then let them know both sides, she said. Let them know about the soldier, yes, but also about the family who refused to bow to fear, about the neighbors who stayed, about the people who cheered when darkness left their street. Tell them it was all of us. Anthony joined her, his crooked arm resting on the counter, his voice rough. He's right, though, Daniel. People will talk. But maybe that's not so bad. Maybe it reminds them what standing up looks like. Daniel let the silence hang a moment, then lifted the mug Elena had placed before him. The coffee was hot, strong, grounding. He took a sip, set it down, and spoke with quiet conviction. Then, let the story belong to all of you. I'll leave when the time's right. The haven is yours again. The old veteran with the cane tapped it twice against the tile-drawing eyes. Listen to him, he said. The man's not looking for fame. He's looking for honor. Difference is, fame fades. Honor doesn't. A murmur of agreement circled the room. Morales checked his watch, then nodded once more to Daniel. We'll keep you posted on Caruso's arraignment, but from here on out it's our mess. You've done more than enough. Daniel gave a single nod. Then I'll be gone before dawn. Nikki's eyes widened. Gone. Just like that? Daniel leaned forward, his voice even steady. Standing guard means moving on when the post is relieved. You've got the watch now, Nikki. You and your family. Hold it. The boy swallowed hard but straightened his shoulders as if those words had pinned invisible stripes on his chest. Yes, sir, he said quietly. Elena's hand brushed Daniel's arm as she passed her touch, warm, motherly. Wherever you go, she whispered, remember, you've got a home here. The Marine Corps pin gleamed faintly over Daniel's heart as he inclined his head in thanks. He said nothing more, but the weight of his silence was enough. Beyond the diner windows, the neighborhood was settling into peace it hadn't known in years. And inside, over coffee and cake and whispered gratitude, the people of Veterans Haven began to believe they could hold that peace a little longer. By the time the last cruiser vanished down Taylor Street, the block had quieted. The neighbors who lingered outside traded stories, voices rising with disbelief that Caruso had finally been hauled off in cuffs. A few clapped each other on the back. Others whispered as if saying the name too loudly might undo the miracle. Inside the haven, a different stillness settled. Not fear, something gentler, something that clung after a storm passes. Elena poured coffee into mugs that trembled faintly in grateful hands. The clatter of spoons returned tentative at first, then steadier until the diner sounded almost like itself again. Anthony leaned against the counter, his crooked arm tucked close, watching Daniel O'Connor. The Sentinel hadn't sought the center of the room, but every glance gravitated toward him anyway. He sat in the booth, tall frame slightly hunched, marine pin over his heart glinting in the light. His badge lay heavy in his pocket. Anthony stepped forward, unable to hold it in. His voice cracked like a man finally allowed to breathe. Son, he said, rough but steady. I don't know how to thank you. You didn't just save my diner. You saved my family's name, our home, our honor. His good hand clenched and unclenched on the counter. I thought I'd lost all that. Elena crossed to stand beside him, her face wet with unshed tears. You reminded us what courage looks like, she whispered. Not in stories, not in old pictures on the wall. Right here, tonight. Daniel shifted uncomfortable under the weight of their gratitude. He spoke quietly, eyes steady. I just did what had to be done. But the room wouldn't let him retreat into modesty. The veteran with the cane cap pulled low eyes, burning with pride, pushed himself to his feet again. His salute was sharp this time, no tremor in his hand. "Soldier," he said, his voice carrying across the diner, "you honored us all tonight. You honored the uniform even out of it." One by one, others followed. A mother with her baby balanced on her hip whispered, "Thank you." A teenager at the back lifted his Coke and a makeshift toast. A man in a delivery uniform clapped slowly, the sound swelling until the whole diner echoed with applause again. Daniel looked at them, every face lit with awe, gratitude, and relief. He inclined his head, but his voice remained firm. Honor isn't in applause. It's in standing where others can't. You were all here tonight. You stayed. That matters as much as anything I did. Anthony's throat worked as he tried to speak. He settled for laying his hand firmly on Daniel's shoulder. "You'll always have a place here. Always." Nicky, eyes bright, held up his phone. "The whole world's seen it already," he announced. "Views are climbing like crazy. The news stations will pick it up before midnight. They're calling you the Sentinel of Chicago." The title made Daniel's jaw tighten. Fame was never the goal. He glanced at the flag hanging behind the counter, its fabric lit by the diner's fluorescent glow. "The tomb doesn't have headlines," he said quietly. "It just has silence. That's where honor lives." Elena's hand touched his arm, again motherly insistent. "Silence has its place, but so does being seen. Tonight people saw what honor looks like. Don't take that from them." The applause grew louder. The crowd outside, still buzzing, picked up the chant again. "The soldier, the soldier." It bled through the windows, rattling the glass, shaking the walls. Vinny's threats were still fresh in Daniel's ears, but the mob boss's voice was drowned now by the people he had once terrorized. Daniel didn't smile, but his eyes softened. For a brief, fragile moment, he allowed himself to feel the weight of it. Not pride, but confirmation. Confirmation that standing here in this place had meant something. He straightened in the booth, shoulders square once more. The Marine pin glinted, the badge pressed against his palm in his pocket. Between them, he carried two truths, one forged in silence, one forged in noise. Both demanded the same thing, to stand. Always to stand. The applause inside the Haven ebbed into murmurs, then into the gentle scrape of chairs returning to their places. Customers, neighbors, strangers, families sat again drinking coffee, as if reclaiming the rhythm of life itself. But every so often, eyes flicked back to Daniel O'Connor. No matter how much he tried to retreat into silence, the room had branded him something more than a passerby. Anthony Russo moved stiffly from the counter, his crooked arm cradled close. He stopped in front of Daniel, his voice heavy with the weight of memory. "I've been carrying this place on my back since '91. Thought I could carry it forever until Caruso's shadow fell across our door. I felt small for the first time in my life." His hand trembled as it reached for Daniel's shoulder. "Tonight you gave me back my size. You gave me back the feeling of standing tall." Daniel's gaze was steady, his voice quiet. "You never lost it, sir. Caruso just made you forget. You fought before. You were fighting tonight. I just finished it." Anthony's jaw clenched. He swallowed, then nodded. His crooked arm lifted, not quite able to salute, so he did the next best thing. He clasped Daniel's forearm in the old soldier's grip. The grip of equals. Elena was next. She carried the small box she had retrieved earlier, though it now lay open on the counter, its contents pinned proudly on Daniel's chest. Her eyes, though wet, were fierce. "You understand what this means?" she asked, fingers brushing the Marine pin she'd given him. "It isn't a souvenir, it's a promise. You carry me, Anthony, every soul who's eaten here, every vet on these walls. That's what this stands for." Daniel bowed his head slightly. "Yes, ma'am. And I'll carry it with the same respect I carried the badge in my pocket." Nicky darted forward, phone still in hand. His words tumbled over themselves. "The comments there insane. People are calling you Sentinel of the streets. Some guy wrote, 'This is what honor looks like in real life.' Another said, 'Finally, someone stood up to the wolves.' You're going viral. Millions will see this before morning." Daniel looked at the boy, his lips pressed into a faint line. "Don't let the noise distract you, Nicky. Truth isn't measured in views. It's measured in whether people feel safe walking back through this door tomorrow. The boy's shoulders dropped, but then he straightened again, determination flashing in his eyes. Then we'll keep them safe, he said, as if swearing an oath. The old veteran with the cane pushed himself to standing once more. His salute was slower this time, his body weary, but his eyes shone. Sentinel, he said, voice gravel-edged. You've given us a story we'll tell our grandkids. A story about a night when one man decided enough was enough. The room filled with nods, with murmurs of agreement. Patrons raised their mugs, toasting silently toward Daniel. The clink of ceramic carried like bells. Daniel stood finally, his presence commanding without effort. You don't need me here tomorrow, he said, his tone firm but not unkind. You've always had what it takes to hold this ground. Tonight you remembered. Hold on to it. Anthony's voice broke. But you're not just some man passing through. You're one of us now. You proved that. Daniel shook his head, his voice softer. No, sir. I don't belong here. I belong where the line needs to be held next. But this, he swept his hand toward the flag, the photographs on the wall, the family at the counter. This belongs to you. Protect it. Elena's eyes brimmed. She laid her hand over her heart. Then, wherever you go, you carry us with you. The crowd outside had thinned, but their chants still echoed faintly through the glass, blending with the pulse of the city itself. For the first time in years, the block felt lighter, as though a shadow had been peeled away. Daniel touched the Marine pin over his chest, then the badge in his pocket. 2 emblems, 2 promises, both pressing heavy against him. He had not sought this night, but he had not run from it either. And now as he looked at the faces around him, he knew the truth that bound them all. Honor isn't given. It's chosen. The night deepened outside, but the glow inside the diner burned steady. Veterans Haven, once just a corner eatery, a modest sanctuary, felt transformed. Word was already crawling through the streets and lighting up phone screens. The people who'd huddled in fear an hour earlier now sat straighter, their voices surer, as though the walls themselves had soaked up Daniel O'Connor's defiance and handed it back to them. Nicky returned to the counter breathless. It's on the news already, he blurted, waving his phone. Local stations picked it up. They're calling it Sentinel Stops Mob Boss in Little Italy Diner. His grin widened. You're trending, man. Daniel raised his eyes from the coffee he'd been nursing, his expression unchanged. News will fade, he said. But what matters is tomorrow morning. When you open these doors again, will people walk in without fear? That's the real measure. Anthony's crooked arm rested on the counter as he leaned closer. They will. Because of you. Don't think for a second they won't remember what you did here. Elena set a fresh pot of coffee on the warmer, then turned to Daniel, her gaze soft but insistent. You may walk away tomorrow, but your shadow will stay. Folks will come here not just for sandwiches, but for what this place means now. A haven again. The old veteran with the cane chuckled, shaking his head. They'll pack this joint, mark my words. They'll sit in that booth of yours like it's hallowed ground, and every one of them will tell the story. The customers laughed softly, but there was truth beneath the humor. Already people spoke of the fight like legend, the details polished in their retelling, how Daniel had caught the bat in midair, how he'd thrown the biggest thug across a table, how Caruso had begged before the Sentinel's knee ground him into the tile. Daniel listened without correcting them. He knew how stories worked. They grew, they spread, they inspired. If that gave this neighborhood a spine to stand taller, he wouldn't strip the shine away. Sergeant Morales returned from outside, brushing the night air from his jacket. He eyed the chatter, the repaired chairs, the customers refusing to leave. Looks like you've got yourself a shrine, Russo, he said dryly. Anthony huffed a laugh. We'll take it. Better than paying protection to that parasite. Morales' gaze shifted to Daniel. You sure you want to ghost out of here? The city could use a man like you. Hell, my precinct could. Daniel met his stare calm and unwavering. My place isn't in one city, Sergeant. It's wherever the line needs to be held. Tonight it was here, tomorrow. He let the words trail off. Morales nodded slowly as though he'd expected that answer. Fair enough. But know this, Chicago won't forget. From the doorway, a cluster of kids pressed their noses to the glass, whispering and pointing. One held up a homemade sign scrawled with marker, "Thank you, soldier." The sight tugged at Elena's heart, her hand pressing to her chest. Daniel rose from the booth, then tall and composed the marine pin, catching the light. He walked to the window, crouched slightly so the kids could see his face, and gave them a small nod. Their cheers burst through the glass, muffled but exuberant, and they scattered into the night like sparks. He turned back, his voice quiet but steady. The people are ready to believe again. Hold on to that. Anthony swallowed hard, his eyes shining. You really are one of us now. Daniel shook his head gently. No, I was just passing through. He touched the marine pin once, then the badge in his pocket. But what happened here tonight, it belongs to you, Nicky. His voice trembling but fierce whispered, Then we'll carry it, sir, I promise. And as the night stretched on with coffee poured and voices retelling the story again and again, Veterans Haven transformed from a diner into a beacon, a place where fear had been broken, a place where honor had taken a stand. The night outside had cooled, but the block around Taylor Street still carried a charge. Even as the last sirens faded, clusters of neighbors lingered beneath the street lamps, swapping their versions of what they had seen or heard. A city like Chicago fed on stories, and tonight it had been given one that no one would stop telling. Inside the Haven, the crowd thinned slowly. A mother bundled her sleepy daughter into her arms. A pair of teenagers slipped out holding hands, their laughter tentative but real. Every departing customer stopped by Daniel O'Connor's booth to nod, to whisper a thank you, to touch his shoulder like pilgrims brushing stone. He acknowledged each one with the same steady nod, though his eyes seemed already elsewhere, half in this room, half on a silent mat miles away. Anthony locked the register and leaned his crooked arm against the counter, exhaustion pulling at his frame. You know, he said, voice low but carrying, I thought about selling this place. Thought maybe it wasn't worth fighting anymore. But tonight, he looked around the diner, at the flag, at the veterans' photos lining the walls. Tonight reminded me why we built it, why we called it Haven. Elena set down the rag she'd been wringing. Caruso thought he owned our neighborhood, thought fear was enough. But fear's gone now. She glanced at Daniel. And you reminded us it never should have been here to begin with. Daniel remained quiet, sipping his cooling coffee. He wasn't one for speeches. His silence was weight enough. Nicky plopped onto the stool beside him, phone still in his hands. His face glowed from the screen. 2 million views, he whispered, almost reverent. Comments from New York, L.A., even overseas. People saying you're a symbol. They're calling you the Sentinel of Chicago. Daniel's eyes flicked to the boy. Symbols don't matter. Deeds do. But people need symbols. Nicky pressed his voice, small but fierce. Something to believe in. Something to share. Daniel looked at him a long moment. The kid's jaw was set, the way young men's often are, desperate to prove they won't flinch. Daniel thought of himself at that age, and of the old lessons drilled into him by men who had known war. Then let them believe in standing up, he said finally. Not in me. In the choice. The old veteran with the cane who hadn't left his corner tapped the floor twice. That's the truth, boy. Don't remember the man. Remember the stand. Anthony poured him another coffee, his good hand shaking slightly. You're a humble one, O'Connor, but whether you like it or not, tonight you showed a city its backbone. Daniel didn't argue. He couldn't. The truth was clear in the faces around him. Outside, a cheer rose faintly as a group of neighbors hoisted a flag up a makeshift pole, planting it into the cracked sidewalk. They saluted, laughed, clapped each other on the back. Their pride carried through the glass, and for the first time in a long while the block felt its own strength again. Daniel shifted in the booth, pressing a hand lightly over the marine pin on his chest. Beside it, the badge in his pocket pressed just as firmly. 2 symbols, 2 oaths, 2 reminders that duty wasn't tied to one place or one title. He looked around the room, Anthony's bent arms still braced on the counter. Elena's tired but unyielding smile. Nicky's wide eyes, full of fire, the veteran's salute still trembling in the air. They had their stand now. His work here was done. He leaned forward, voice low. I'll be leaving in the morning. Elena's hand flew to her chest. So soon Daniel gave a small nod. This was never my home, but it's yours. You don't need me to keep it safe anymore. Anthony swallowed hard, his voice thick. Wherever you go, son, you'll carry a piece of us with you. Daniel stood then, tall and straight, and the room hushed again. "Honor isn't in staying," he said quietly. "It's in choosing to stand. Tonight, you all stood. Don't forget how." The words sank into the walls, into the people, into the very air of the haven. Outside, the city hummed with the beginning of a legend. Inside, a neighborhood remembered its strength, and in Daniel's chest, beneath the pin and the badge, his heartbeat kept its steady, unshaken rhythm, marching always ready for the next post, wherever it might be. By the time the clock neared dawn, the haven had emptied into a silence that was almost reverent. The smell of coffee lingered, mixing with the faint metallic tang of blood that had been scrubbed from the floor. Chairs were righted, tables reset, but the air still carried the weight of what had taken place. Daniel O'Connor sat alone at his booth, staring through the window at the city street. Chicago had always been a city of contradictions, hard edges, and soft hearts, corruption and courage sharing the same block. Tonight had shown both in stark relief. Elena approached, carrying a folded cloth. "You didn't touch your pie," she said softly, her tone as though she were talking to a soldier too tired to move. Daniel gave her a faint smile. "I never eat much after a fight." She hesitated, then set the cloth on the table. "It's a handkerchief. My father carried it back from Vietnam. He always said it reminded him that no matter how much dirt or blood he saw, there was still something clean left in the world. I want you to have it." Daniel's jaw tightened. He reached for the cloth, his calloused fingers brushing the fabric, but he pushed it gently back toward her. "Keep it. Your family fought for it. You'll need it again." Her eyes glistened, but she nodded, folding it carefully into her apron. "Then promise me something. Promise me you'll keep standing for yourself if not for us." Daniel didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked past her, out into the thinning night where the first streaks of dawn painted the brick walls in pale gray. At last he said, "Standing is all I know." From the kitchen door, Anthony appeared, still in his apron, crooked arm tucked close. He leaned heavily against the frame. "You'll leave before the sun's fully up, won't you?" Daniel inclined his head. Anthony sighed, the sound of a man resigned to both loss and pride. "Then hear me out. This place will never forget you. Not in a week, not in a year. We'll tell your story until kids who aren't even born yet know the name O'Connor. You gave us more than protection. You gave us dignity." Daniel rose from the booth, sliding the badge into his jacket pocket, his fingers brushing the marine pin once more. "Dignity isn't mine to give. You had it already. Tonight, you just remembered." The old veteran with the cane tapped toward him, each step echoing like a drum. He stopped in front of Daniel, his voice ragged but steady. "Sentinel," he rasped, "you don't know it yet, but tonight was more than a fight. It was a turning point. Caruso's men will scatter, but the people he pointed toward the door, toward the street beyond the people, will rally. You woke something." Daniel nodded once. "Then let them carry it forward." Nicky darted from the back, still clutching his phone, though his eyes were wet now. "The world's already awake, man. Hashtags everywhere. People saying they wish they had someone like you in their city. They're calling you the soldier who took Chicago back." His voice cracked. "Don't go, please." Daniel crouched down, meeting the boy's eyes. "Listen to me, Nicky. Heroes don't stay. They move on so others can step up. Tonight you saw what happens when people stop being afraid. That's your job now. Hold on to that." Nicky swallowed hard, his knuckles white around the phone. "I'll try." Daniel rested a hand on his shoulder. "Don't try. Do." A silence fell between them, heavy with finality. Outside, the city stirred the rumble of trucks, the honk of a cab, the shuffle of early workers. The world moved on as it always did, but inside the haven time seemed to pause, holding its breath around the man who had stood when no one else dared. Daniel straightened his shadow, stretching across the diner's floor. "It's time." Anthony's lips trembled, but he nodded. Elena turned away, blinking hard. Nicky stood frozen, torn between pride and grief. The veteran raised his cane in one last salute. And Daniel O'Connor, the tomb guard who had faced down a mob and given a city back, its soul walked toward the door with the quiet, unshaken stride of a man who belonged everywhere and nowhere at once. The first light of morning bled into the streets of Chicago, brushing the rooftops in pale gold. The city was waking, delivery trucks clattering over potholes, pigeons scattering at the sound, and shopkeepers lifting metal grates with groans and squeals. To most, it was just another day. But to those who had been inside the haven, it felt like a new beginning. Daniel O'Connor stepped outside the diner door, closing quietly behind him. The air smelled faintly of rain, though none had fallen, and somewhere down the block a church bell rang. His boots hit the pavement with the same rhythm they had carried on guard duty years ago, measured deliberate, unyielding. Behind the glass faces pressed to watch him leave. Elena stood with her hand over her heart. Anthony, apron still tied, leaned on his bad arm but stood tall. Nicky raised his phone one last time, not to record, but to hold as though it were a torch. The old veteran cane raised saluted until Daniel disappeared from view. The neighborhood was still marked with last night's violence, trash cans, overturned shards of glass glittering in the gutter, streaks of blood scrubbed but not gone. Yet there was no fear clinging to the morning air. Instead, people emerged from doorways drawn as if by instinct. They saw him, recognized him, and paused. Some whispered, some lifted a hand. None stepped forward. They all knew instinctively that this was a farewell. Daniel kept walking past the corner bodega where the shutter was just being unlocked, past the stoop where two old men sat watching with tired but reverent eyes. One of them muttered, "That's him, the Sentinel." The other simply nodded. At the end of the block, a cab idled, its driver leaning out. "You, Daniel?" the man asked. Daniel gave a small nod. "Where to?" Daniel slid into the back seat, his voice calm, almost distant. "Union Station." The cab pulled away, and with it, the man who had turned a night of terror into a story of defiance. Inside the haven, silence hung for a long moment after he left. Then Anthony exhaled, wiping his face with his apron. "We'll keep this place open every day," he said quietly. "We owe him that." Elena whispered, "We owe ourselves that." Nicky turned to the veteran, his young face determined. He said, "It's our turn now." The old man tapped his cane against the floor, eyes glinting. "Then we better not waste it." News vans would arrive within the hour. Reporters would flood the street cameras, flashing questions flying. Caruso's grip on the neighborhood had already snapped, his men scattering in fear. The people would rally stronger than they had been in years, united not by Daniel's presence, but by his example. And Daniel himself, gone as quietly as he came, would move on to another place, another stand, another moment when honor was all that held the line. The legend of the Tomb Guard in Chicago was born that night, and like all legends, it would grow, told and retold, changing in detail, but never in truth. A man had stood alone against an entire gang, and in doing so reminded a city of its courage. And somewhere far from Taylor Street, Daniel O'Connor sat in silence, the Marine pin warm against his chest, the badge tucked close to his heart. His eyes scanned the horizon, not for glory, but for the next place where duty would call. Because for a sentinel, there was never rest, only the next watch. If you like the story, consider sending a super chat to help bring more similar stories. Now click on the video on the screen to hear another story that is equally powerful and compelling. With courage, sacrifice, and a choice that makes you question everything you know about duty and justice. Click on the video.